These are the 25 books I want to read in 2025. Over the past year and a half, I've really fallen in love with reading, and as a reader that has a full-time job, that is finishing a PhD, is creating content online, and is also an entrepreneur, I'm shocked that I managed to read 42 books last year, and there are so many that I'm excited about in 2025. I had to really hold it back when I was making this list because there are so many book releases in 2025. I really think that 2025 is going to be the year of new books. Some of my favorite authors that have been a little bit on hiatus finally have another book coming out, and I can't wait to share it with you. So without further ado, we're gonna go ahead and just dive straight in and just talk about the 25 books that I'm so excited to read in 2025. Number one is none other than Lord of the Rings by Tolkien. I love Lord of the Rings, but I have never actually read the books all the way through. My partner read them last year and fell in love with them, and he was telling me all of his comments and his notes, and I was so envious. And so one of my goals for 2025 is to read Lord of the Rings. The second book I'm really excited about is Promise of Lies. It is part of the Tenebrous Court trilogy, I believe, and it is by Claire Sager. I filmed a reading vlog where I read the first two books and I was hooked. This is a book about a girl who is brought in by the court to act as a spy on the Fae ambassador who is visiting, and all of these different adventures ensue, and the last book left us on a massive cliffhanger. If you are a lover of Fae romantasy, then this is right up your alley. I ended up ranking the first book, I believe, a 5-star, and the second book, I think, a 4.25. And I'm really interested to see what she does with the third book. There was a lot of speculation about when this book was going to come out, but it came out on the 31st of December. So I've ordered it. It should be arriving in the mail in the next couple of days, and I'm going to be diving straight in. So I'm really excited for Promise of Lies. The third book that I'm really excited to read this year is The Will of the Many by James Islington, or Islington. This is a book that made its way around TikTok last year. It is meant to be an academy setting inspired by ancient Rome. And that's essentially all that I know, but it is one of the most highly recommended books, and I just didn't get around to it in 2024, so that is definitely top of my list. Number 4 is The Sword of Kaelyn by Emma Wong. I loved Blood Over Whitehaven. It was my number 1 book of 2024, and I am just so excited to read more of her work. I have read half of this book so far. It is dense. It is a standalone fantasy. It is high fantasy. It is Japanese history inspired, I believe, and it is beautifully written. If you liked the Poppy War, and if you like East Asian mythologically inspired fantasy, then I think you're going to absolutely love this. It is one of the most highly ranked books on Book Talk and on Goodreads, and I think for good reason. From what I've seen so far, the writing is beautiful. I think the character arcs are impeccably done, at least to the point where I got, and so that's a book that I really want to finish this year. The fifth book that I really want to read is The Final Empire by Brandon Sanderson. I have just seen so much about Brandon Sanderson. He supposedly is the high fantasy king at the moment, and I find his books really intimidating. They are really long, they're really thick, and sometimes I struggle with high fantasy because it requires so much world building, but high fantasy is what I really want to get into in 2025, so I'm gonna give it a shot. I really want to read through the Mistborn series. It's one of Allie's favorite series, I believe. I've just heard so many good things about Brandon Sanderson's writing. I want to get into the Cosmere. I want to check it out, so that's gonna be one of my goals in 2025. Number 6 is The Book of Azrael by Amber Nicole. This is an urban fantasy, and it looks slightly dark. I've heard that the main female character is quite morally gray, which sounds really intriguing to me, but I haven't read any urban fantasy other than Crescent City, so I am skeptical but interested. Number 7 is Wild Swans by Jen Chong. This is a intergenerational story about Chinese women in the pre and post communist revolution era. For those of you that have been following for a while, then you know that my great-grandmother was born in China and fled during the communist revolution to Taiwan, where my grandmother was born. And then they immigrated to the United States. And there's a lot of family lore around my great-grandmother and how she was given away by her family. And so there's a lot about Chinese history that I really want to dig into, but especially from the point of view of women during the communist revolution. So Wild Swans is one that has been on my list for a little while. My partner is actually the one who recommended it to me, and I'm really excited to read it in 2025 and connect with that side of my family history. Next up is Dead Wake by Erik Larson. Erik Larson is a really incredible historical fiction writer. He wrote Devil in the White City, which I read back in undergrad. He also wrote another book about an American who goes to Germany during the rise of Nazism and the Holocaust. This is a book about the Lusitania, and for those of you that know anything about me, then you know that I was obsessed with the Titanic for like 3 years when I was a child, and just became really fascinated with the White Star Line and ships of the early 20th century. I'm terrified of water as a result, but this book has been on my shelf for years, and I feel like re-emerging into my nerdy obsession with the Titanic and with the White Star Line is due for a bit of a renaissance. Number 9 is Wolf Hall by Hilary Mantel. Now, all of you are going to be shocked that I have not read this. Hilary Mantel is one of the most famous historical fiction writers who wrote primarily about the Tudor court. So this book, I believe, is about Cromwell. It has been on my shelf for years. It is also one of the only books I've actually heard early modern historians say that they enjoyed reading. And if that doesn't tell you anything, then I don't know what does. Number 10 is The Fifth Season by N.K. Jemisin. This has been on my list for a really long time, ever since my friend Christy said that the kind of center of the plot is matrilineal descent, which if you know about my dissertation research, then you know that I have a weird connection and interest in matrilineal descent, whether that is in history, in law, in personal relationships, and as a fantasy reader who reads a lot of fantasy that is inspired by Black history and the Black Atlantic, I am really fascinated by N.K. Jemisin's work, and I have started this book, but I'm really excited to dig in. I'm really hoping that it's a series that'll grip me, so that way I can read on through, because I'm really wanting more series in 2025. Next up is Stoner by John Williams. This is a book that was recommended to me by my friend Kate. It is about a man who ends up at a university, and it's just kind of, I think it's the interwar period. I don't actually know much about this book, but it is one of those classic stories of academic experience and the kind of discontent of being in your young adult years. I don't know much more than that, but I'm excited to dig in and learn a bit more. Number 12 is A Court This Cruel and Lovely. This is a book that's been sitting on my shelf for a little while because it was making its way around Book Talk. I think Emmy was the one who talked about it. I don't know basically anything about it other than fae fantasy and romantasy. I should probably know more. It's on my shelf, so I could just read the synopsis, but it's been on my list for a while, and I just love a fae fantasy. So I'm excited to see what it's all about. Now we're gonna go ahead and jump on into new releases in 2025, starting with The Favorites by Lane Fargo. This is meant to be an ice skating romance, and it sounds really fascinating. My roommate back in college used to be a figure skater, so I know basically nothing about figure skating except for what I learned from Chloe. So it sounds interesting, and it's coming out on January 16th. Next, we have The Curse of Midnight, which is coming out on January 28th. So the one challenge is that there are a bunch of books on this list that I remember basically having the same synopsis, and I know that they don't, so we're gonna have to do a little bit of a Google. So this is the synopsis for Curse of Midnight. Noah Kears has wandered the halls of his ancient home, bound by a curse that keeps him trapped within the estate's iron gates. The ghosts keep him company, but they're poor substitutes for the one person he waits for, the love of his life. When she arrives, McKenna doesn't remember him. She never does. Noah, however, knows their time together is short. The curse keeps it this way. But this time is different. It has to be. Because after a life of love and loss, Noah thinks he may have discovered a way to finally break the curse that binds them both. Sold. Sold. Sounds absolutely fascinating. The other book that I'm really excited about, and I might be more excited about this than almost all of them, is The Rose Bargain. It's set in Regency era England and has some kind of supernatural elements to it. I don't know much more than that, other than the sister needs to somehow help her sister get the attention of the prince, I believe. It sounds very Bridgerton. I'm sold. I can't wait. It's coming out on February 13th, just in time for Valentine's Day, and I am going to be binge reading it. I am blocking out that Saturday, so that way all I can do is read. Next we have Our Infinite Fates, and this is a star-crossed lover's romance, where the main character, Evelyn, has in every single life been murdered. However, she really wants to remain in this particular lifetime. It seems to be very Addie LaRue coded. I had not read Addie LaRue, but from what I remember of the Accepted Society book club members talking about it, it sounds very interesting, and that one's coming out on February 27th. On the same day, we have The Rebel Witch, which is the second book in the Crimson Moth series. I loved the first book. It was a tiny bit, maybe quite predictable, but it was a wonderful enemies to lovers romance that incorporates witches, witch hunters, and it left us on a traumatizing cliffhanger. So I'm very interested to see how the second book is. From the people that have had access to the ARC, which by the way, I'm very jealous of you if you got the ARC for this book, they seem to have loved the second book even more than they loved the first. So I can't wait for that book to come out. I didn't even pre-order it because I want to be able to run to the local Waterstones the day it comes out. Grasp it in my hands, immediately go to a coffee shop, crack that open, and just have a day of it. On April 8th, we have Fearless by Lauren Roberts, which is the third book in the Powerless series. I personally love these books. I know that some people are quite mixed in their reviews of it. They think that it's a little bit cheesy. I love it. I think that the banter is scrumdiddlyumptious. So I'm very excited for the third book that left us on a very, very interesting cliffhanger. So I don't really know how she's gonna pull it back from that, but I'm very excited to find out what Fearless has in store. On April 3rd, we have Olivia Blake's Gifted and Talented. If you loved Succession and you like fantasy, this really seems up your alley. I love the way that Olivia Blake writes. I personally read Alone with You in the Ether and just fell in love with the way she crafts a story, and this just seems fascinating. Next, we have Servant of the Earth by Sarah Hawley. This book is kind of your standard fae with a human who is conscripted as a servant. I don't know much more than that. From what I've seen on the reviews, from people that I personally really trust on Book Talk, it seems like it's going to be a good book. And I, unfortunately, am inclined to follow trends and follow people that I personally think that they have taste that aligns with mine. And basically, if Tammy or if Emmy say that they like a book, I'm gonna buy it. And if that isn't a strong influence, I don't know what is. 2025 is also the year of the traditionally published fan fiction. So I recently got into Hermione fan fiction, which is Draco and Hermione. Self-explanatory. A bunch of the authors of fan fiction for Hermione are getting traditional publishing deals, which means that they need to transform the story so that way it doesn't infringe on copyright, but they're going to have a book out, which is really exciting. So we've got Rose in Chains that's coming out on July 3rd, The Irresistible Urge to Fall for Your Enemy on July 8th, and Immortal Consequences on July 31st. I do not know much more than that amount of information. Basically, if it's Hermione, if it's fan fiction that's being turned into a traditionally published book, I pre-ordered it. Number 24 is Vita Nostra. This is a dark academia novel, which essentially sells me every single time, but Kate, my best friend, my bookish bestie, is the one who recommended it to me. And if Kate tells me that I'm going to like a book, I trust her wholeheartedly. I don't expect her to lead me astray. And when she told me that Vita Nostra is like Harry Potter but adult, I was sold. I had to have it. So I downloaded it on Kindle and I can't wait. And last but not least, the book that is the top of my list for 2025, Calabasas by R.F. Kuang. I have the utmost respect for Rebecca Kuang. Not only do we go to the same school and I love her books, but she is one of the most impeccable writers of our generation. And I say that with my full chest. Babel, Poppy War, Yellowface. I love the way she writes. I love the way she invents new worlds. And this book is about two magicians who are students at Cambridge who need to travel down to hell to save the soul of their advisor. Fantasy, academia, R.F. Kuang. You already know she is an automatic buy for me. And I'm going to try everything in my power, everything, to grow on Book Talk and BookTube simply so that way I can please, universe, get an arc of Calabasas. I would die. I would die. I'd be really, really, really happy. Those are the top 25 books that I'm hoping to read in 2025. Please comment down below what you're excited to read in 2025. And if you want to keep up with what I'm reading, then I highly recommend checking out my Instagram because I update regularly over there, but also keep an eye on my blog. So on my website, I keep an updated log of all of the books that I'm reading, as well as my reviews. So you can head on over there. I'm also on the Fable app for those of you that are looking for an alternative to Goodreads. And I will see you all very soon for more bookish, academic, work-related, basically any content that I feel strikes my fancy at that time. But thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you all next time. Bye, friends.